Hey guys, welcome back to Brian's Mysteries and Adventures on Trail, and today I'm going to be doing something a little bit differently. And this video, I first got the idea because a lot of hikers are often referred to as hiker trash, and the reason being is, and I know hikers know this, but for anyone that doesn't, is just because we often look very dirty and messy and unkempt, and often referred to as looking homeless. And hikers don't care about this. In fact, it's just a common phrase that they use with each other. But something I've never talked about on my channel before is charity work is something that I really enjoy doing. I am very involved in helping the homeless, and I like to get involved in various charity organizations with helping the homeless, whether it's working in soup kitchens or things like that. And in any event, this picture is actually a picture of a hiker, but it's kind of misleading. You see him, it's got a shopping cart there. And because of that, on the rare occasion, a few of us have experienced a small glimpse into just the harshness and how mean people can be. Obviously, from a mental standpoint, being a hiker is much different than being homeless. I mean, you have the mindset where you can go and get a hotel or go home if you want to. Being homeless is a whole nother story. So I'm by no means comparing the two. And this person is actually homeless. And I just think that in general, the world needs more empathy. I think that if everybody just were more accepting and open-minded and weren't so quick to judge other people based on whatever, anything. When we judge others, we do not define them, we define ourselves. I think we as society as a whole need to be less judgmental and open our eyes and hearts and minds more and be more empathetic to those around us. In this video, I will be discussing the ongoing and escalating homeless crisis that we are seeing in America, and worldwide for that matter. But here in America, being one of the wealthiest nations, we have one of the highest rising homeless populations, and that really shouldn't be. I mean, we have all this money, yet we can't build more shelters. And just to talk a little bit more about the situation and what's going on, and just how everybody can do their own part to help the situation. Everything we do can make a difference in someone else's lives on a daily basis. I think a lot of people would actually be shocked at the numbers. There are over 500,000 homeless people in the United States alone, and certain cities like Los Angeles have over 60,000 homeless people just in that city. And I'm going to have this information, all the numbers and stuff, in the description. This video will probably be hard for many people to watch, and it was very hard to make from an emotional standpoint of view. This video is in no way trying to make people feel bad or guilty or anything like that. This is more just me trying to raise awareness and bring attention to this situation that is only growing by the thousands every year, especially with COVID. And just take a minute to think about how hard it would be if you were on the streets, homeless with nothing. And the actuality of it is that most Americans are only one paycheck or one event away from being homeless. And again, that's not me being negative. It's just that oftentimes we pass these people in the street and we might just ignore them or not really understand that the majority of them, they're not drug addicts, they're not alcoholics, or if they are at the time, it wasn't the cause of them becoming homeless. Moreover, they're doing that just to mask the pain of being homeless. And I've actually heard people walk by homeless people and say, get a job, or throw things at them, or even spit at them. And it's just heartbreaking. And it is extremely hard once you're on the streets to get off the streets, to get a job. I mean, somebody walking by saying that doesn't realize how hard that is. I mean, think about if you weren't able to bathe and shower and have the just necessity. Look at how hard it is when you do have a home to get a new job in this day and age. I think a lot of people too would be shocked by the actual numbers. 40% of homeless people in America are youths, young people, teenagers. And the 70% of the homeless population are young people under the age of 50. It's not this, Vietnam veteran person that you sort of imagine, which obviously there are a lot of veterans on the street, and the statistics does rise if you were ex-military. And that to me is even sadder. Here we have these people that have gone out and defended our country, and they end up on the street. Now, they do have the Veterans Association, and they do have good benefits for those that want to go and get them. But again, it's a lot harder than most people think. And even with the veterans benefits, it's very difficult in most states to get into affordable housing. I mean, the housing is just out of control in America. The average apartment, a one-bedroom apartment, is $1,200, $1,400, $1,500, $1,600 in and around cities. And most people are nowhere near able to afford that once they're on the streets. And, you know, rents every year just keep going up. I mean, I can barely afford my rent that I pay right now. When I first moved into this apartment, it was $1,000. That was 4 years ago. Now it's $1,450. That's a huge jump. And this is happening all over America. And it's no wonder that the homeless situation is growing by the day. Many homeless people have full-time jobs or 2 different jobs, but they just can't afford housing in their area. And in a lot of places, the police have decided to criminalize the homeless, and they're constantly harassing them, and, you know, they have to move their stuff. And, you know, imagine like if you're woken up at 5 a.m. or, you know, by a policeman yelling at you and screaming at you, threatening to arrest you. And what are you supposed to do? And the ironic thing to me is, in what we as Americans call third world countries, which I think is a ridiculous term, but because we all live on the same planet Earth, the same world, people over there can just put up a shanty or a little house wherever they want, and they're left alone. Here, people are out on the streets, and it's like people just, you know, out of sight, out of mind, think it's like, well, okay, we just got to move them here, get rid of them. I mean, what do we expect these poor people to do? This is a practice known as sweeping, and just the police come in with the sanitation department, and they just take all the homeless people's stuff and throw it in a big bin, or tell them to get out, threaten them with arrest, tell them to gather up what they can and get out of there. And many homeless people lose all their stuff in just an instant, and this happens to them over and over. And again, I'm not faulting any particular group or the police, because the police are just being done what the politicians tell them to be. This is a nationwide crisis that needs to be addressed at the highest level. But as individuals, we can each do our own part. And the biggest thing I'm trying to convey is just to never assume anything. Have a change of attitude. And what I mean is, if you see a homeless person, don't assume that, oh, they're, you know, a drug addict, or they got out there on the streets because they did this or that. You know, you never know why. Other thing is, a lot of people will do things just for a feel-good moment. Like, you might give somebody $1 or $5 or $20 on the street because it makes you feel good. But in reality, in the long term, helping the homeless is often very hard, and it's painful. And it's not going to make you feel good because you're going to have to see what they're going through every day. And the struggle might take months, years for them to eventually get off the street. And I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't give that person the $1 or whatever you're planning on doing. Always help. That's a great thing. But just know that it's not always going to be a feel-good type moment. Life expectancy for people living on the street is only 48 to 50 years old. I mean, that is just so sad. Another awful thing that homeless people often face is shelters will give them an ultimatum, a choice. Let's say there's a couple, a man and wife, that are homeless. They will say, well, you either separate and one of you can have a shelter, or that's it, you know. Or if you have a pet, they say, well, if you don't get rid of that pet, you're never going to get housing. Now think about how hard that would be. We all have pets, or those of you that have pets know how attached we are to these animals. And that's, if you're out on the street, that's the only thing you have. And here they're being told, oh, you have to give that up or you can't get housing. What a terrible, terrible position to be put in. And lots of shelters charge anywhere from $7 to $10 a night. Now, how is somebody who has no income living on the streets going to be able to pay that? Many homeless people that are interviewed actually will say they prefer living out on the streets over the shelters, because some of the shelters are just so overcrowded. They're infested with bed bugs. They're subject to assault or rape or all kinds of things. And they're usually, a lot of these shelters are just so overcrowded because the homeless situation in America has just escalated to the point where there's nowhere near enough room in the shelters. And That's not to say that there aren't some good shelters and good churches and good organizations out there. There are, but still there isn't enough to accommodate the growing homeless population. And unfortunately, this is not a situation that's improving. Now, ironically, with COVID, it has sort of changed the dynamic for some homeless people. For example, they have stated that the police don't harass them as much, but obviously they don't have the much option of going into a shelter because it's just people on top of each other. And obviously during COVID, this would be a recipe for disaster. I mean, there's no social distancing and that kind of thing. And what the government tried to do was they started this program called Hotel Key or something like that, where they had motels where they were giving rooms to homeless people, but it usually was only for a night or a week. And they often have very strict rules. It's not like you or I getting a motel room. For example, not being able to take all your stuff with you, like all your tents and all that kind of thing. So how's that going to work for them? I mean, you're in this hotel for a couple days and then you have nothing to go back to. So a lot of them did not want to do this. Or another example is they weren't allowed to bring their pets, or there's just so many things that we take for granted, and it's just a very hard life out there. But for many homeless people, this was a big deal and a huge step up. So there are programs that are trying and things that are in place. Things like sanctioned tent cities, where they actually have rules and regulations and security and clean bathrooms, and these things are great. They have power and recharging stations and things like that, and there have been shelters that have been set up to be socially distanced, and these things are great, but we're just nowhere near a real long-term solution. And unfortunately, every homeless person that gets housed, 20 more become homeless. So I think it's just one of those things where we constantly have to be reminding ourselves that these people are human beings just like you and I, and they deserve the same respect and treatment, and no one should have to live out on the streets. I mean, it's just a horrible, horrible way to live. And yes, a very small percentage have got themselves into the situation by doing drugs or something bad, but everyone deserves a second chance. And actually nowadays, the majority of people, it was a matter of circumstances or timing or someone losing their job. I've read countless stories of people. There was this one guy in particular that stood out. He was a millionaire and his bank went bankrupt back in the financial crisis, and he ended up out on the street, or people get divorced, or just there's all kinds of things that happen. And I think, like I said before, the main thing I'm just trying to convey is we just need to have a change of attitude and not look down on those people, just to have a more respect for these people and do more to help them. I'm just saying that oftentimes we pass them in the street and we don't even think twice about it. And I think that we need to change that. And I was watching an interview on YouTube with a guy who goes around and talks to homeless people. And then in the comment section of that YouTube video, people were attacking some of the homeless people, saying like, well, how do you have a cell phone if you're out on the streets? And just think about how much we use our phones these days. There's actually programs in place to get people, homeless people, phones and to keep them active, because that's their only lifeline to the world. And think about how hard it would be to get a job without a phone. Everything is done online these days. But again, this woman in the comment section was having to defend herself, and another woman was saying, she was being attacked because she was wearing, $2 makeup. And again, some of these things are just things that we take for granted and assume homeless people shouldn't have or don't need. And the reality is they're people just like you and me. I'm not saying that there's an easy, quick fix or one main solution, but I do know that as a whole, if we all have a change of heart and attitude and just put ourselves in these people's shoes or anyone else's shoes and just think about how you would want to be treated if you were out there and just how hard it would be. I mean, it is so sad hearing some of the stories of how, people just sitting there on the street, they're spit on, coffee is thrown on them, they're yelled at, they're beaten up. I mean, it's just an absolutely horrible way to live, and no one should have to live like that. I think if we all open our eyes and change our hearts, things can start to change, but we all have to do it together.
Lying of you. I'm caught up in circles, confusion is nothing new. Flashback, one night, almost left behind. Suitcases of memories, time after.
Sometimes you picture me, I'm walking too far ahead. You're calling to me, wondering what you said. When you go slow, I fall behind. The second can be wise. If you look, you can look, and you will find me. Time after time. If you fall, I will catch you. Will be waiting. Time after time. If you look, you can look, and you will find me. Time after time. If you fall, I will catch you. I will be waiting. Time after